Here's what I'm planning to do. I announced in the description of the program that I would be teaching a beginning and intermediate and advanced practice. So I will dedicate each of the 3 hours to one of those. We'll start with the beginning one, and we'll move on in the second hour to the intermediate, and then the advanced will come in the third hour. I'm planning to present for about 50 minutes each hour and provide about 10 minutes for people to take a break before we start the next round. And I ask that everybody do their best to show up and settle down and be quiet so that we can get started right at the hour. We're getting a little bit of a late start, so we may have to adjust the timing a little bit. We'll see how that goes. There will be some PowerPoint support for this. It's not a lecture like the kind that I did before. Mainly its purpose is to put the ideas that I want you to consider while we're doing the practices in front of you so you can refer to them if at any point you need a reminder. And I'll do a little bit of explanation. Then I'll suggest, in some cases, some inner work that we can do in silence. And then we'll do a sharing for those of you who would like to volunteer to share your inner experience, recognizing that when you do that, you are contributing to a collective body of knowledge that is useful for everyone. So let's begin. There we go. Oh yes, I wanted to remind everybody about our Heart Sutra. Why don't we open the session with doing what we did to end the session yesterday. Join me in saying both the Sanskrit and the English versions. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi svaha. Gone, gone beyond the beyond, gone beyond even that. All hail such wisdom. So here's our basic practice. I just told you the steps, reminded you of them. This is specifically a practice for developing buddhi. I usually think of buddhi as unity consciousness. And the technique itself is eroding or erasing, or attempting to do so, some of the obscurations of the mental body that create a difficulty for us to experience unity consciousness. Here again is our basic spiritual practice. Show up, be fully present, be kind to ourselves and others in thought, speech, feeling, and action. Find a right best next step to take in mutual joy. And we can do this 4-step practice daily to develop buddhi, the perception and realization of unity consciousness within ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about what showing up is. Anybody who knows someone who's perpetually late knows what not showing up is. That's simply one example. And the interesting thing about that example is it's ultimately not kind to ourselves and not kind to other people not to show up on time for something. But showing up can actually occur as a problem in any of our bodies. So the example I just gave is the physical showing up. But what about emotional showing up? If we show up and we've got a lot of stuff going on inside of ourselves, we may actually be present in body, but not present in our emotional body. The same thing can happen with the mental body. These are the 3 elements of the personality that we need to look at. As far as being fully present is concerned, anybody who has watched the audience for our workshop carefully will have seen cell phones being scrolled through. That's what I consider to be the great temptation that we have these days in the area of not being fully present. And it becomes such a habit, no one really notices. When I ride the public transit system in Boston because I don't have a car by choice, and we have a very good transit system, and when I look around the train, what I see is this. Nobody is paying any attention to anything going on outside the windows, inside the car, with the people next to them. People aren't even reading books, so you can look at the title and say, hey, I read that book. It's pervasive. So that's an element of being fully present that we need to be aware of. And let's just think about these for a moment in a larger context. So I did a version of this practice with a couple of my classes before I got here, just to see how it worked. And one of the things that was really interesting to me is that the problem with showing up was usually based on resistance of some kind. And the resistance usually seemed to come from something that people wanted to avoid, probably because they disliked it, or it was painful, or possibly even traumatic in some way. So if we're going to work on showing up, those are the areas that we will need to look at. What is our resistance? In a similar way, with being fully present, I noticed among my students that the issue there tended to be not so much resistance, but fear, and especially fear of loss of control over the situation. And both of these things come from an aspect of the personality, especially the mental body, that one spiritual teacher I know of calls the tyranny of likes and dislikes. So my understanding of the way the mental body works is it helps us sort out information. It's very good at this, but it also usually only uses two categories: I like and I don't like. And then it bases its decisions on whether I can increase the likes and decrease or eliminate the don't likes. The problem is interacting with the life around us often creates a lot of dislikes and a lot of stories about the nature of reality, and seems to frustrate a lot of likes. And most of the contents of our mental body are involved with ruminating over that, all of that. And these are the two things that I think make it impossible to show up and be fully present. That we are either caught up in likes and dislikes from the past, or anxieties about likes and dislikes projected from the present moment into the future. So I'd like to make a little experiment now that all of you can participate in. And this is a nudge in the direction of possibly using this basic spiritual practice as a way of self-exploration in a journal. I'm not going to ask you to do a lot of writing, but if you do have writing utensils, or even if you can just keep it present in your mind, what I'd like you to do is think of 3 areas in your life where you have difficulty showing up. And just notice anything about that, any thoughts, any feelings that come up. And what we'll do later is take one of those and go a little deeper with it. Now, interestingly enough, my students had difficulty with the word areas. It's like, what specific area are you talking about? Well, we can not show up in so many areas. I didn't really have an answer to that question. And besides, there's no way to do this wrong. I mean, just think about what you don't like doing, It could be mowing the lawn. It doesn't have to be a spiritual thing. So let's take a couple minutes to make some notes about areas in our life where it's difficult for us to show up. And the ideal is 3, but if you only come up with 1, 1 is enough. I'll give about 3 or 4 minutes for this. So let's finish up that task, and what I'd like for us to do now is a little bit of back and forth, and I'm going to keep John busy with his steps this morning. And for those of you who would like to share something about your findings as you wrote down areas in which you had trouble showing up, I'd like to hear that. My suggestion is to be as brief as possible. There's no need to tell a story or provide any kind of context. I think we'll soon recognize that there are universalities about these kinds of things, and I really just want to bring this into the room as a basic knowledge base. I'm also not going to take any requests from the online people, because I think whatever gets stirred up in the room will be sufficient to prove my point. Later there'll be time for questions from the online folks. So would anyone like to begin?
Going to meetings that lack any specific objective.
All right, so I'm going to make just little brief comments. This comes under the category of likes and dislikes, I would say. Okay, go ahead.
Holding myself accountable to not move appointments around for my clients and myself.
Holding yourself accountable, that's a form of not showing up. I would call that maybe not being present more than not showing up. So that helps to make a little bit of a distinction. Not showing up is usually stated that way, as David did for us.
Going to public places where there are a lot of people who are unknown.
Okay.
Just the general fear and anxiety.
Okay, but maybe an example of a specific area where that might show up?
Just being in a crowd of people that you don't know,
Okay.
or being asked to go somewhere where you might not know a lot of people. There's
Okay.
fear and anxiety, so maybe you don't show up.
Yes.
Social gatherings.
Aha, we have a theme developing here.
Family functions with siblings.
Yep. That would come under the example possibly of past trauma, or at least traumatic experiences that you don't want to repeat if you can.
Listening to others before sharing my thought because I'm afraid I will lose the thought, and I often advise rather than listen.
That sounds like a being present issue. So let's revisit that in the next part.
Cleaning my house, garage, and rooms.
Thank you. That comes under the heading of self-care, and usually that's a fairly big category where people tend not to show up in a variety of ways.
When I have to face criticism.
Okay. That's an interesting one that could also be categorized under being fully present, because if it's there, you know, and you're having to face it, how are you being present to it? So it sort of straddles a category. It's definitely one of those dislikes, though.
Being around people who I have felt hurt by.
Yep. That's the trauma element.
Having to deal with a bureaucracy and not knowing the result.
What was the last part?
Not knowing the result.
Okay. You know, when do we ever know the results of anything? Sorry, that's a interesting thought about the whole problem with showing up, because really it's about the mind anticipating with dread, which may or may not be what we experience if we do show up. Yes.
Mundane tasks that don't require a lot of brain power.
Okay, that's good. What if there isn't a lot of brain power in a particular moment? You know, washing the dishes or something like that could actually be soothing. But yes, I get you.
Meeting the deadline of a commitment to maybe make a phone call or a text to arrange a meeting with people who are needy. It's sort of an avoidance.
Boy. There might be good reasons to want to avoid that. That actually, you know, may come under the heading of being kind to ourselves and others. We'll revisit this. Just a couple more.
Going to the dentist and doctor appointments.
That's a big one, and that has to do both with dislikes and past trauma, I'm absolutely sure.
Financial planning.
Yes, that's an element of self-care. Let's just take this one last. Oh, sorry. We'll come to you last.
Withdrawing from contentious discussions.
Isn't that a choice about not being present, like removing yourself? So that comes under the second heading, I think.
I totally refrain from corporate politics in the workplace, discussions in corporate politics or politics in general. I detach from the conversation. I don't involve myself. I don't show up there. I don't know if that's showing up.
You know,
here.
that sounds like kindness to yourself and self-care, and so I would say that's a good one to end on, because sometimes it's helpful to know that not showing up and not being fully present is really the best thing for yourself. Okay, so self-care and sometimes care of others and the dread going along with that have a lot to do with this idea of showing up. So let's take this to the next step. Once we get over the problem of showing up in any one of these areas, just pick one, just notice what the issues might be with respect to being fully present in that situation. It could be just a carryover of the not showing up. In other words, the body's there and the rest of you isn't. I think what I'm looking for here is people acknowledging and maybe naming a few things about the mental noise that prevents the ability to really show up. So just take another couple minutes to think about being fully present in one of the situations that you listed and what might make that difficult, especially around the mental noise aspect. And then we'll check in again. Three minutes once again. Okay, let's finish that up. And we'll do another round of sharing, which can involve the same people or others. And once again, try not to tell stories, just be as brief and clear as possible.
So my mind, when I resist showing up for siblings, I'm the oldest, therefore I'm always responsible for anything that happens. Okay, mentally, and also outwardly. They're criticizing if I don't take responsibility even for some of their doings, because I'm the oldest and have basically raised them. So a lot of mental activity around that. And when I see it, I try not to get triggered. So what I do is just ask them a question. Turn it, rather than say, you do this, you do that. So I've learned how to take that in reverse, but I still resist showing up for those functions. And I'm very close to all my siblings, so it's interesting.
So what I want to point out about this sharing is, as a result of looking at the difficulty showing up and the difficulty being fully present, the idea of how to be kind to self and others emerged from it. That's the value of this practice in terms of writing things down. And even if you don't like it, you're kind to yourself and others by doing what you can. And that means holding some things back and guiding some things and letting some things come in. So that I think is an excellent demonstration of the value. Thank you for that, of this particular way of thinking. Someone else?
Mine is simple. I showed up a bit late. The NASDAQ is up 1.32%, but I want to be fully present, so I'm going to turn off my phone.
Okay. Now, once again, a step has shown up, okay? So Being kind to self and others is, in this case, turning off the phone.
My showing up was caring for my parents and being fully present. I had old resentments and lack of interest in the discussion and what's going on. So I'm only kind of halfway there half the time.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a very loud inner voice that is constantly talking to me, keeping me away from being fully present, offering resistances or speaking against my own thoughts.
Okay, so this is an example of what I mentioned about how with the being fully present, there's often an issue of control. So that's some element that is, essentially controlling you. And the interesting thing is, by making this observation about yourself, you've already started to distinguish the part of you that observes from the part of you that has this experience of generating these thoughts. So in order to get to buddhi, we have to activate the causal level of being. That's our soul level of being. That means getting out of the mental level, and you've actually defined both of them without realizing it. The mental level is the loud voice that's telling you this and that, which is usually likes and dislikes based. But by taking a moment to consider and observe that voice, you immediately move up to the next higher level where you're witnessing it. The next step is building out from that level so that that level is in control of the lower one instead of blocked by the lower one. Someone else?
Impatiently or hastily preparing food because I am hungry, rather than taking the time to avoid mistakes and enjoy the activity genuinely.
That almost sounds like substituting one form of self-care for another. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You started it off by saying when you're hungry. I have this little rule for myself, which is the body always wins. It doesn't matter what the soul wants to do. When those needs become extremely assertive, the body's going to win. So if you're listening, that's a good thing. That's being fully present to your body, so later you can be fully present to others.
Mental noise because I'm overcommitted.
Oh boy, that's a big one about self-care, isn't it? We will investigate this in the next part, being kind to ourselves and others.
Getting others to accept the harm they're doing to others.
Interesting. That also, I think, will be an interesting discussion for being kind to ourselves and others.
Being fully emotionally present with a girlfriend, sometimes she tells me, I'm a little bit detached in my head when I'm with her physically.
How many women have had this experience? Raise your hand, please. All right. This is an element of what we call family and social conditioning. You can overcome it, but it really takes bringing a meditative practice into everything in your life. I mean, the practice is, can I be fully present even when I don't want to be? Can I notice when I'm not fully present and not have to be told that I'm not fully present? Because you know what happens there? I don't like being told I'm not fully present. Therefore, I'm going to withdraw even more.
So when you, for example, have a loved one who has mental health issues and you want to show up for a visit, but you can't be fully present, at least emotionally, to protect yourself, is that does this go to the next step, or because it will drain you emotionally one way or the other?
That's the key, the idea of being emotionally drained. Remember this when we get to the find the right best next step, and then we'll take another look. One more? Two more then.
Guilt that I don't do more by contributing to society.
Okay, this is another good one for find a right best next step, so bring that up again later.
This is a very interesting exercise because I would have never come to this conclusion if I hadn't thought about it. But this fear of going to the dentist and doctor is okay. There's three things there. Fear of having to change, acknowledging my limits, and a basic distrust of the medical system in my mind.
Okay. This is a hard one because is it being kind to ourselves just to let ourselves die so we don't have to deal with these things? So, okay. Now, what I want people to notice is, I've used this phrase yesterday, being an agent of turning stuckness into flow, which we'll talk about later in one of the later hours. What has happened by just taking a moment to consider these things is some stuckness has moved into a minimal flow for most people. So that's, once again, demonstrating the value of using these very simple things, turning them in for self-contemplation, and then finding a way forward. So let's now talk about being kind to ourselves and others. So think about what you've heard from people, think about what you've noticed in your own process. If you consider these things that you've written down and ask yourself, is this a matter of not being kind to myself? Or is it a matter of not being kind to others? Or is it a matter of not being kind to both myself and others? It's perfectly legitimate to realize that in some cases, so for example, overcommitment, being kind to others can actually block being kind to oneself, and there needs to be a balance. So as I said, it's perfectly legitimate to decide to set aside your own concerns to really show up for other people in service, as long as that doesn't compromise your self-care. But it's also valuable to show up to yourself when you understand that there's a situation in which you're going to have difficulties being fully present for others. So don't think about it as, I don't like this situation. Think about where you can be most effective in terms of service. So we'll talk more about that later. Really, the basis of this spiritual practice is being kind to ourselves and others. And the idea of showing up and being fully present are very practical things we need to think about all the time in terms of being kind to ourselves and others. But there is, in our lives, a situation that we frequently come up with where we simply don't know what to do. There's maybe not even a clear intention not to show up or be fully present. There's a feeling of stuckness, like we can't take a next step. And so that's what I want to talk about here. The mental body wants us to believe that it's the absolute, only, and best decision maker possible. But it only has one tool, which is black and white thinking. So, we see this all the time everywhere. People are engaging in extreme thinking, and the value of it, in a sense, is it helps you categorize things, but there's no nuance, there's no gray area. There's only what I don't like, and that has to go away, and what I do like, and that has to come in. And essentially, when Theosophists talk about selfishness, that's what they mean. So moving ourselves in the direction of unselfishness requires, in a sense, that we need to take up what we don't like, and we need to let go of what we do like, and build our life on making decisions to move forward on that basis. Because the mental body will keep us locked into habits and routines around that, where we're compulsively seeking out what we do like and trying to enhance it, and then trying to to avoid everything that we don't like. So under these circumstances, when we feel absolutely blocked, what's really happening is the soul is saying, or the causal body is saying, here's the next step, and the mental body is saying, here's the next step, and they're in absolutely opposite directions. And you simply don't know which direction to take. So this idea of finding a right best next step to take in mutual joy can help break that impasse. Because if you're able to take that step, you can show up, you can be fully present, you can be kind to yourselves and others, you can really find the step that works for the greater good of all, and joy will be the result of that. However, there's not just knowing what that step is, there's also the ability to take it. And what I have found is, I'll just use an example from my own life. I have lots of interests, I have huge piles of books I want to read, I have all kinds of projects that I'm involved in. Some of them are creating PowerPoints for presentations like this, some are books I want to write, some are pieces of music that I've contemplated wanting to write. Many, many things like this. So how do I possibly know which one of those is worthwhile? And then there are all the financial records that have piled up. You know, there used to be a medical condition called piles. You don't hear about this very often. And I have a friend who says, I have piles. You know, I need to learn how to get rid of these. So, again, this is all the result of not showing up, not being fully present, not being kind to ourselves and others, procrastination. I mean, there are lots and lots of different ways. It can actually be an act of service to ourselves and others to meditatively find a way to clear through all of that. But how do we do it? You know, we open the door to the closet that's so full that stuff pours out on top of us, and the only thing we can think of is just stuffing the closet back full again because it seems like it's too much to deal with. So I have something that I call the what would happen if approach, because the mental body is always saying, if you try to do this, you will feel overwhelmed. And so you don't even try. There's always something that will seem more rewarding. But what would happen if I picked up this piece of paper that's in the wrong place and move it to the right place? Now, that's not usually overwhelming, and it gets you started, because the minute you finish, you'll think, oh, I know where the next piece of paper goes. And then if you just follow that, you've turned stuckness into flow, and you'll feel a sense of relief. So that's essentially what I mean by find a right best next step to take in mutual joy. That right best next step can never be considered in terms of anything global. So, you know, if your desire is to change the world, you don't start at the top, you know, which could be assassinating multiple presidents of different countries, or it could be going on a crusade of some kind. What you do is you start with the person you're in front of right now. You show up, you be fully present, you're kind to yourself and others, and you're talking about values and seeing whether you can encourage someone to consider another possible set of values. And then realizing that if you get someone thinking, they might take that somewhere else. And at that point, you have to invoke what I'll call the Dalai Lama law. This is something the Dalai Lama actually said. I heard it said many times about 20 years ago. I finally tracked down on the internet that he did, in fact, say it, because you never know these days when things are attributed to people. The Dalai Lama said, look for the results of your actions in 700 years. Okay, so think about that. What it means, A, is you can't have expectations that you're going to get immediate transformative results in the present moment. There's always a process, there's always a step-by-step going forward. The second thing is, you'll probably be here in 700 years seeing the effects of your actions in some way, right? And then maybe you'll know whether they were good or not helpful or not so helpful, and that'll set you up for the next 700 years. So we can't really have these expectations of immediate and global change or transformation. We can only take one step at a time. And that is, just even taking one step is always the right best next step for us. But among the steps that we can take, there may be a refinement. There may be an awareness of being present in the universe, so showing up to the universe, so being fully present to the universe, so working with the intention of being kind to ourselves and others, that when we take that step, it really is for the greater good of all, and it really uplifts us, and there really is some noticeable movement of stuckness into flow. That is what I call the true right best next step. We have to have very quiet minds to get to that point. And I have to tell you, it's never something you conceive of or think about. It drops in because some part of you has taken in an awareness of the different forces in play and come up with a solution, or you've been helped to that, or it's been suggested to you by some higher power within yourself or that's working with you, guiding and teaching you. So this basic spiritual practice leads not only to unity consciousness, but also to a clear enough mind that we can hear those indications of what our right best next step is. And we get there by taking that piece of paper and moving it from the wrong pile into a filing cabinet, just as one example. So that's why I call these practices we'll be working with today, daily spiritual practices about going beyond. It may seem silly to think gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha, about moving a piece of paper, but how long was it in that pile, right? 5 years? I have some piles like that. Okay, so what I want to do now is open things up to questions. We got started about 7 minutes late, so we'll take 7 or 8 minutes worth of questions and then take a break.
Thank you. Please just raise your hand.
Thanks, John. Kurt, can you say something a little bit about maybe shadow logic as a component of binary thinking, black and white thinking? So, for example, I can only have this job if I live in this place, and how that creates stuckness?
I think that would take us too far afield. The concept that she mentions is one that I've invented. It's the way that the mental body persuades us not to listen to the soul because it wants to be boss. And it comes up with very logical arguments by taking things that themselves are true and linking them in inappropriate ways. You could call it the mental body's own personal internal disinformation campaign. So another question?
So when I heard my own example as well as the other examples, in determining that right best next step, that still seemed to be coming from the mind, right? Because in most cases, I'm assuming that the whole purpose of this is to quieten the mind and get to the point where it is actually your buddhi that is coming up with the answers. So how...
This is an excellent question. Our family and social conditioning, this may be a worldwide human thing, I definitely know it's an American thing, is there's a problem and I have the solution. Okay, problem-solution thinking. It's never that simple, because if you see the problem and someone else doesn't, it's probably because that's the level of growth that they're moving through. And if you have the solution, it probably means that you moved through that issue in a past life. And if you're going to try to get them to change, you're going to have to impose on them what you learned in the past life without honoring the fact that they may need to learn it for themselves in this life. So what you pointed out is the mental body component of problems and solutions. But the mental body will tell you that it's not a solution to your pile problem to move one piece of paper. It'll convince you that it all has to be dealt with, and then it feels like it's too much, and then you move on to something else. So problem and solution thinking is pervasive, and we really have to work very carefully to examine ourselves and work it out. It's really difficult for self-aware individuals and people who are have moved along on the spiritual path, because everywhere you look, you see what could be called perfectly preventable suffering. And you would wish to lift people up. But the fact is, the better mantra of self-care and care for them is let them have their experience. And I hate to say it, but even if they blow up the planet, we'll end up on another one, continuing our reincarnational cycle. That's not the preferred outcome, and there are, of course, lots of forces who are working to make sure that doesn't happen, whether we can see it or not. But again, think about problem and solution thinking. My personal belief is everywhere where there's a problem, anywhere in the world, it's a result of misplaced values. So if we are, as Theosophists are trying to be effective workers in the world, we need to embody higher values and show that they lead to happiness and joy. And when others see that in us and say, how did you get there? Tell them something about the story of how we got there. The fact they saw that is an indication that they might be ready to take a step. That's how we change the world. So maybe one more question before, yes.
Thank you. When you were speaking earlier about stuckness with, I'm in a situation, I'm wondering if you would repeat and expand. I think you said the astral body and the mental body and the soul doesn't really know what to do.
This is something that we'll be talking about continually throughout the program, so I think it's better to put that aside. And Nelda had a question, and then we'll end with that and take a 10-minute break.
Where does discernment come in?
Everywhere. Inescapable.
Let them have their experience. So what if John falls right in front of me and he breaks his leg and he's suffering? Well, maybe he needs that experience. Should I just watch him suffer, or should I help him?
How kind to him and to yourself is it to let him suffer? Yes. But the thing is, so this is where we'll end. I have what I think of as a 5-stage conception or process of compassion. And my belief is that true compassion requires that we live from all 5. And it's a practice in and of itself to figure out where we are with each of these. The first one is understanding, seeing where people are. Really looking at them, really understanding that what you're seeing in front of you is a being, an evolving being at a certain place on the path, and whether you like it or don't like it, that's who they are, that's where they are. The second step of true compassion is making the attempt to understand how they got there. So what's their story? That can involve deep listening, which can move a lot of energy. The third one is, and this is the hard one for most people, especially around the idea of preventable suffering, how might it be that their experience is perfect for them in terms of their learning and growth at this stage? Because, and this is the part that people miss, if you move in to try to rescue them from that experience, you are now standing between them and karma, or them and the source, or them and God. You become responsible for their karma, and that creates problems on both sides that will take a lot of disentanglement. So it's very difficult when you see preventable suffering not to feel that you have to intervene. However, beyond this, the fourth step is help, but only if asked.
Say that again?
Help, but only if asked. If someone sees that you have something in you that could be helpful for them, and they ask you for that, find a way that you can show up for them, be fully present for them, be kind to yourself and them in that presence, and find a step to take in mutual joy. And the last one, which is another one that people don't understand, is stop at the first sign of resistance. The stop at the first sign of resistance. Because we may see the whole growth process. They may only be able to hear the first step. If you can even just say that first step and they can hear it and take it, we've done good for them and good for the world. Beyond that, we can't solve their problems, save or rescue them. And if they're resisting us and we're raising our voices, we are now not compassionate because we are turning them into our problem that we have to solve for us to have peace of mind. And I call that putting other people out of our misery. Not a good thing to do.